is Misak Khachatryan, and I am a mental health therapist and doctoral candidate in clinical psychology at the Wright Institute in Berkeley, California. I would like to talk about grief, a universal experience that affects people in different ways across different cultures. Grief is the way in which we respond to a loss, whether it's a person, place, or a thing. It's the loss of something or someone we felt very emotionally connected to, and in some ways it played a role in our lives. Grief is not just sadness or feeling of upset. It can be experienced in a variety of ways, including bodily, physical, emotional, spiritual, or cognitive. And a feeling is expressed in different ways, such as crying. Grief is important, and we need to grieve. It comes in waves. After we experience a trauma, for example, it is important to consciously grieve. We must come to terms with the loss, and we have to recognize what was lost and that life will go on. Grief is typically described as having 5 stages. The first stage is denial, where the loss is so shocking and overwhelming that a person denies it's true. People might say, "I can't believe this happened. This can't be true. There's no way." The loss is so heavy that it may not register easily, and we do not know what to do with it. Denial actually acts as a buffer, allowing the person time to develop coping skills or coping mechanisms. After denial, the next stage is anger. The question of, why me? Or why us? It's not fair. The anger can be directed toward anyone who may have played a role in the loss. People can feel anger toward nurses or doctors if their loved one dies in a hospital, or politicians if they are largely responsible for a loss, or even God for allowing the loss to take place. Sometimes, grief can manifest as anger and resentment. These feelings can be protective in many ways, helping people avoid feelings of abandonment, loss, and deep sadness. Anger is also a secondary emotion which blankets our deeper pain and motivates us to take action. Anger can be projected onto relationships itself, or onto oneself for allowing the bad event to cause such immense damage or loss. After anger, the third stage is bargaining. Sometimes people try to make deals with the higher power, such as, "Please God, if you heal my parent or undo some negative event, I will be a better person in life and never take things for granted." People may avoid feeling lost by trying to negotiate with other powers or people, hoping things will get better. Guilt is a very common emotion in this stage, and the what-if statements arise. People wonder what more could they have or should have they done to prevent the loss, and they feel bad that they didn't do enough. This is especially prevalent in the diaspora communities, where we may see people feeling survivor's guilt or diasporan guilt, that they can do more, they should have done more, and that what can they do now to prevent or to undo what was already lost. After bargaining, the next stage is typically depression. So depression comes when a person realizes that bargaining didn't work, that the loss is inevitable or it already happened. And so here a person will grieve all that was lost, physically and symbolically. It's the emptiness we may feel inside, noticing the numbness and fog in our minds. We may want to withdraw from people and activities we love, and we may engage in more things that happen in solitude or in isolation. We may just check out from meeting friends or having dinner with family members. After depression comes acceptance, which is the 5th and final stage of grief. Acceptance doesn't necessarily mean that a person is okay with the loss or doesn't feel sad. Instead, acceptance is understanding that there was a loss and I'm going to be okay. While the loss is a bad thing, it's something a person can still live with. In this stage, people will reintegrate with friends and slowly take steps to adjust and readjust to life. Now, as I stated earlier, grief comes in waves. These stages are not meant to be understood as being chronological stages, but rather a spectrum. People can go back and forth between these stages. There is no specific way to grieve or time limit for grieving. Everyone has their own process and ways of navigating through this difficult process. It can especially be difficult during anniversaries or holidays where memories of what was lost reemerges. People can process it emotionally, feeling profound pain, or cognitively, where grief is an intellectual process and is channeled through activities such as fundraising. Grief can be complex and sometimes messy. A lot of times, grief can be disenfranchised, meaning that the grief a person or community feels is not recognized by others as legitimate or reasonable. It refers to a situation where loss isn't openly acknowledged, socially sanctioned, or publicly shared, such as in the cases of someone having AIDS, substance use disorders, or events that occur in one's homeland, such as in the case of a war or loss of significant lands or people. Others may not understand what that means, and it becomes really disenfranchised and complex. The complexity is hard for others to understand, and sometimes the complexity can also be hard for us to understand for ourselves, that what is it exactly that we have lost and are losing. Loss can sometimes be ambiguous. When the loss is unclear or ambiguous, grief becomes frozen. There's no resolution, there's no closure, we don't know where we are, and it's really hard to move forward, and it's impossible to move back. It's a loss that isn't marked by something that's definite, such as biological death. It becomes difficult to make sense of reality and difficult to know how to move forward with it. Sometimes loss can be unclear in the case of missing persons, or prisoners of war, or incarceration. In these instances, a loved one may be physically absent from our lives, but alive in the world and psychologically functional. We just don't have access to them. But that is something that people can also grieve. Other times, loved ones can be physically present but psychologically absent, such as in the case of dementia, brain injury, or drug addictions. These types of losses are difficult to grieve or make sense of on a personal level, and other people's lack of recognition certainly can add onto the feeling of despair. While people can grieve other people, they can also grieve inanimate objects such as a home, a job, loss of a home, loss of relationships, loss of safety after trauma, and so on. These objects or experiences in the world can certainly symbolize something very near and dear to our hearts. They are sometimes a part of us, so when the connection is lost, a part of us also becomes lost. And it is hard to carry on with the void and emptiness that we feel inside. Not only does the separation bring up distress or sadness, but it can also register as trauma, which includes strong negative emotions, shock, and efforts to avoid. And the trauma is maintained while we feel stuck around what happened and the impact it had on us. The feeling of an injustice may be immense, and it's hard to find any resolution. There is no normal timetable for grieving. People can process their grief in weeks, months, or even years. However long it may take you, be patient with yourself and let the process naturally unfold. Ignoring the pain won't make the feeling go away any faster. It's okay to feel sad, frightened, or lonely. You do not have to be strong. You may cry or not cry. That is also okay. Here are some things you can do if you are dealing with grief and you would like to know how to cope with it. First thing you may try is to acknowledge your pain or experience. Just observe what has happened. What does it mean to you? Next, you may want to accept that grief can trigger many different and unexpected emotions. Sometimes we can make certain associations with the loss, such as abandonment or the pain that we felt from previous losses or traumas. It's also important to understand that your grieving process will look different, and you should not compare yourself to other people. It's going to be unique to your experience. You may also seek out face-to-face support from people who care about you, or start to see a therapist or grief counselor if you haven't done so yet. You may also support yourself emotionally by taking care of yourself physically. Many times, physical activities such as exercising, running, can relieve a lot of pressure and stress. You may start a new hobby, or if you already have hobbies that you enjoy, make an effort to maintain them. You may write a letter to whoever or whatever you have lost. And you can also think about what new rituals or traditions you can start to honor and remember the person, place, or thing that you have lost. And lastly, you can consider engaging in spiritual activities that are meaningful to you, such as praying, going to church, or meditating. And with that being said, I would like to thank you for watching this video. I hope you find whatever you are seeking and take care of yourself with lots of compassion and empathy. Thank you for watching.